The host. I've always been a cheap traveler, not out of necessity, but because I enjoyed the thrill of stumbling across hidden gems. You know, the places that don't appear in guidebooks or glossy Instagram feeds. That's how I found the house. It was listed on Airbnb for an absurdly low price, $40 a night for a private home in the middle of nowhere. No reviews, no ratings, but the photos showed a charming two-story cabin surrounded by dense woods, rustic yet modern, with a crackling fireplace and big windows that poured sunlight into the living room. It looked like the perfect spot for a weekend getaway. The host, a man named Daniel, responded to my inquiry within minutes. His profile picture showed an average guy, late 30s, dark hair, and a pleasant enough smile. His messages were short and polite. Check-ins at 3 p.m., addresses below. Don't hesitate to reach out if you need anything. I arrived just as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long, eerie shadows over the property. The house looked exactly like the pictures, but there was something off. Maybe it was the silence. No birds, no insects, not even the rustle of wind in the trees. Just a thick, unnatural quiet that wrapped around me like a shroud. The key was in a lockbox, as promised. When I stepped inside, the air felt oddly heavy. The decor matched the photos. Cozy furniture, warm colors, and a faint smell of cedar. But then I noticed something strange. On the coffee table lay an old Polaroid camera, the kind that spits out instant photos. Next to it, a note in scrawled handwriting. "Take a photo when you arrive. Leave it on the table." I chuckled nervously. Maybe it was some quirky tradition of the host, like a guest book, but weirder. I almost ignored it, but something about the wording made my skin crawl. It wasn't a request. It was a demand. Still, I didn't want to make a bad impression. I snapped a picture of myself holding a thumbs up, waited for the image to develop, and left it on the table. By the time I unpacked and settled in, night had fully fallen. The silence outside had become oppressive, like the world itself was holding its breath. I tried to distract myself with Netflix, but the Wi-Fi didn't work, despite Daniel insisting it would. Fine. No big deal. I had a few movies downloaded on my laptop. Around midnight, I heard the first noise. A soft, deliberate creak from the floorboards upstairs. I froze, straining to hear. The sound came again, closer this time, as if someone was shifting their weight. I tried to rationalize it. Old houses make noises. Wood expands, settles. Nothing to worry about. Then came the footsteps. Slow, measured steps, descending the staircase. My heart hammered in my chest as I grabbed the heaviest object within reach, a cast-iron fireplace poker. I stood there, barely breathing, staring at the staircase. But no one appeared. The footsteps stopped. I forced myself to check, every hair on my body standing on end. The stairs were empty. The whole house was empty. At least it looked empty. That's when I noticed the Polaroid camera was gone. The photo I'd taken of myself earlier was still on the table, but now there was another picture beside it. My breath hitched. It showed me standing in the same spot, holding the fireplace poker, taken just seconds ago. My mind raced. Someone had to be inside. I checked every door, every window, every closet. Nothing. But that silence, that oppressive, unnatural silence, it was like the house itself was mocking me. I didn't sleep. I sat in the living room, the fireplace poker gripped tightly in my hands, waiting for something, anything, to happen. At 3 a.m., my phone buzzed. A message from Daniel. "You didn't lock the front door." I bolted upright, my eyes darting to the door. It was locked. I double-checked it after I heard the footsteps. My hands trembled as I typed back, "Who are you?" Is this some kind of sick joke? No reply. The next morning, I didn't waste any time. I threw my things into my bag and practically sprinted to my car, but as I pulled away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. Daniel was standing in the window watching me. I reported the listing to Airbnb, but when I checked a few days later, it was gone, like it had never existed. I tried Googling the address, but it didn't show up on any maps. To this day, I don't know who or what Daniel was. I don't know how he got that photo of me or why he chose me to stay in that house. But sometimes when I'm alone, I swear I can feel someone watching me, like I'm still standing in that living room, waiting for the footsteps to start again. I've always been a skeptic when it comes to paranormal stuff. Ghosts? Demons? Nah. Life is weird enough without adding monsters into the mix. That all changed a few months ago when I booked an Airbnb for what should have been a routine weekend getaway. I was heading to a small coastal town I won't name here. It's beautiful but remote, nestled between cliffs and dense forests. The photos of the Airbnb showed a cozy cabin with vintage decor, perched on a hillside overlooking the ocean. The price was a steal, and I thought, why not? When I arrived, the place was even better than the photos, rustic but well kept. The host wasn't there to greet me, but left a key in a lockbox by the door. Inside, everything was tidy and smelled faintly of cedar. A note on the counter read, "Welcome. Please make yourself at home. Don't hesitate to call if you need anything." Pretty standard, right? I settled in, unpacked, and spent the first evening sipping wine on the deck, watching the waves crash far below. It felt like paradise. That night, though, paradise started to feel off. It began around midnight. I was in bed half asleep when I heard it. A soft creak, like footsteps, coming from the floor above me. My first thought was that it was the house settling. Old wood does that. But then it happened again. More deliberate this time. Step. Pause. Step. The thing is, this was a single-story cabin. There wasn't a floor above me. I sat up, heart pounding, straining to listen. The sound stopped. Just silence, broken by the faint rustle of leaves outside. I told myself it was probably an animal on the roof, a raccoon or something, and forced myself back to sleep. The next morning I shrugged it off and went about my day. I explored the beach, grabbed some coffee in town, and came back to the cabin as the sun dipped below the horizon. The golden light made everything feel safe again. But that night, the strangeness escalated. I'd just turned off the lights when I heard it again. Those deliberate footsteps. This time they were coming from the hallway. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. The cabin was locked. I double-checked. Nobody could have gotten in. Grabbing my phone, I turned on the flashlight and crept toward the sound. The hallway was empty. I felt silly, like one of those idiots in horror movies who checks the dark corners instead of running. But I couldn't ignore the growing unease in my gut. I went back to bed, phone clutched in my hand. That's when the whispering started. It was faint at first, almost like a breeze, but soon I could make out fragmented words. They seemed to come from the walls themselves. I couldn't make sense of them, but the tone was urgent, almost pleading. I didn't sleep that night. By morning, I was ready to leave. I didn't care about the non-refundable fee. Something was wrong with this place. I started packing my stuff when I noticed something strange. My phone, which had been charging overnight, was dead. The outlet worked fine, it charged my laptop just fine, but my phone was completely drained. As I was zipping up my bag, a thought struck me. The host. Maybe they had security cameras in the cabin. That would explain the noises, right? Someone watching me, trying to freak me out. Furious, I opened the Airbnb app to message them. But their profile was gone. No name, no listing, nothing. It was as if they'd never existed. My hands shook as I called Airbnb support, but the rep said the reservation was still active, though they couldn't explain why the host's profile had disappeared. Feeling more paranoid by the second, I decided to check the lockbox outside. Maybe there was a name or address on the spare key tag. As I stepped onto the porch, a chill ran down my spine. The lockbox was gone. The guest book. I've always liked traveling alone. I'm not antisocial or anything. I just enjoy the freedom of solitude. A few weeks ago, I found myself in a remote mountain town I'd only heard about through a travel blog. The writer called it a hidden gem, full of breathtaking views and charming locals. It sounded like the perfect escape. The Airbnb I booked was cheap. Too cheap in hindsight. The pictures showed a rustic cabin, perched on a hill with a dense forest sprawling out behind it. The reviews were sparse, but those that existed spoke of the cabin's old-world charm and serene isolation. The host, a woman named Lydia, was described as attentive but private. Sounded fine by me. When I arrived, the first thing I noticed was how still the air was. The road leading to the cabin was a winding gravel path barely wide enough for my car. The cabin itself looked older than it did in the photos. Weathered wood, a sagging roof, and a porch that creaked ominously underfoot. Lydia had left a note on the front door with a key attached. "Welcome. Make yourself at home. Don't hesitate to reach out if you need anything. Lydia." Inside, the cabin smelled faintly of mildew and something else, an earthy metallic scent I couldn't place. The furniture was mismatched and worn, but the place was clean enough. There was no Wi-Fi and my phone barely had a signal, but I wasn't here for that. I wanted peace and quiet, and this place delivered. On the coffee table sat an old leather-bound guest book. It was thick, with yellowed pages, the edges curling slightly. A pen rested on top, tied to the book with a fraying piece of twine. I flipped it open out of curiosity. The first few entries were normal enough. People talking about how beautiful the area was, how much they loved their stay. But as I turned the pages, the tone began to shift. One entry read, "I heard footsteps outside the window last night. There's no one for miles. Who could it have been?" Another said, "If you hear whispering, don't listen. They don't like it when you listen." I laughed nervously and closed the book. People like to mess around in these kinds of places, I told myself. It's probably just some bored guests trying to scare the next person. That night, the wind howled through the trees, rattling the windows. I'd always liked the sound of storms, but this one felt different, almost angry. Lying in bed, I thought I heard faint tapping on the window. I told myself it was just branches. At around 3 a.m., I woke up to a noise. It wasn't the storm this time. It was coming from inside the cabin, a rhythmic creaking like someone slowly walking across the floorboards. I froze. The sound stopped just outside my bedroom door. I didn't breathe. I didn't move. After what felt like hours, the creaking started again, retreating back toward the living room. Gathering every ounce of courage, I grabbed the flashlight from the bedside table and tiptoed to the door. I cracked it open, just enough to peek through. The living room was empty, but the guest book was open on the coffee table, pages fluttering as if being turned by an unseen hand. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't cooperate. Instead, I crept forward, drawn to the book against every instinct screaming at me to leave. The page it had stopped on wasn't blank. The words, scrawled in jagged handwriting, read, "We see you." My flashlight flickered. The air around me felt heavy, oppressive. I backed away, my heart hammering, and that's when I saw it. A shadow moving across the far wall. It wasn't mine. I bolted for the front door, not caring about the storm raging outside. The porch steps gave way under my weight, sending me sprawling into the mud. I scrambled to my feet and ran to my car, fumbling with the keys. When I finally got it started, the headlights illuminated the cabin's front porch. Lydia was standing there. Her face was pale, eyes wide, and unblinking. She raised a hand, as if to wave, but her mouth opened into a silent scream. I floored the gas pedal, not looking back until I hit the main road. When I got home, I couldn't shake what had happened. I tried to find the listing again to leave a warning, but it was gone. No trace of Lydia, no trace of the cabin. It was as if it had never existed. But sometimes, late at night, I hear faint creaking sounds in my hallway. And when I close my eyes, I can still see the guest book. The words, "We see you," burned into my memory. I wish I'd never turned those pages.